flag salute. Okay, this special meeting is the purpose of the budget presentation. It's all yours.
Okay, good afternoon. How is everybody today? Today we are going to present the 24-25 budget. I want to take you back to last year when we said we're going to kick the rock down the road a little bit. This year we're going to pretend that rock is a pop or soda can. What happens when you kick it down the road? It explodes and it goes everywhere, and that's what we're trying to prevent. Okay. So if you have any questions along the way, feel free to stop me, and I'll stop and answer your questions. Okay. Okay, we're going to start off with the Othello School District Board of Directors. You guys are going to be authorizing a resolution in 2 weeks to approve the budget. You authorize the expenditures for our programs. The district administration, starting with Dr. Pete Perez, we oversee the budget and we make sure that we're following all the rules and guidelines. Okay. The budget timeline, we start working on the budget around March and we go through June. We start with the enrollment that projects the staffing, and then we're also dealing with negotiations and audits, and then we're looking at the legislative updates and see how they're going to affect the upcoming school year. By July 10th, the preliminary budget is due. I'm very sorry because I was going to introduce Angie Garza and Lori Taff. And the reason that July 10th brought that to my attention was that this year, right before the budget was due, my uncle passed away and I had to leave to Mexico for a funeral. And this amazing staff of mine was able to make sure that my budget, my preliminary budget, was due. So I just wanted to give them kudos and thank you for everything that you guys do.
For the new board members, you might let them know where your preliminary budget goes first.
It's on our website.
But it's also, you send it into
Yes,
the
it goes
ESD.
to the ESD. They review it and they give us feedback, and we're making changes. I did get the review back with very minimal things to change on it.
Amy, if they do ask for changes, normally what is it? Or like, what would be, like, what would be a certain thing that they would say maybe change?
They really don't like change, like you're spending too much on this. It's not operational. It's mostly, I don't even remember the one thing that they said this year. I think they were asking about our leases. So it's very minimal, the feedback that we've gotten. They're just making sure that we, everything's going into the EDS program in the right spot. Okay. I did, however, send them my spreadsheet. I sent Travis my spreadsheet of where my 4 years was for him to review, because I was, a little apprehensive about it, and he said that it's normal. It's not just me, so. On August 22nd, we are going to have another special board meeting where you guys will be able to ask questions. And anybody from the community that has questions will also be able to ask questions. On August 26th, I will not be in attendance, but I will be listening, and that will be the budget hearing, which is where you basically going to sign the resolution to approve the expenditures, the budget. Okay, what is a budget? We do it to develop a tool to make sure that we're fiscally sound, and it's just something that we go by to make sure that our expenditures or our revenues are where we think they're going to be. We have internal controls. We're constantly monitoring the budget and making sure that our expenditures are in the right place, they're coded correctly per OSPI guidance and accounting manual. We create an alignment of our budget with our values. We comply with all local, state, and federal mandates. We follow the accounting guidelines. We maintain our district programs. And one of the big things is that we try to hold ourselves accountable for every dollar that goes out with integrity, and we're being very fiscal responsible and transparent. Any questions? One of the things that we do is try to project out what we think our expenditures are going to be. So we take the current year's expenditures, we see where they might go up, where they might go down. Like, for example, this year we were told ahead of time that our insurance for our property was going to go from $800,000 to $1.1 million. So we just try to make sure that our expenditures are in line with what we know. ESSER is the COVID money that we received. This 23-24 school year is the last of it. We will not have any for the next school year. IPD is implicit price deflator, and this year that's the amount that OSPI adds to the salaries and to the MSOCs. This year the IPD for salaries was 3.7%, which was the same as last year. Last year, the MSOC, which is the materials, supplies, and operating costs, they went up 3%. This year, they only increased it by 1.9%. So even though, for example, our property insurance went way up, our gas is going way up, our fuel cost, our electricity, we only got 1.9% for those costs from OSPI. TK is, at first it was transitional kindergarten, now it's transition to kindergarten. I think we were going to continue to call it TK, transitional kindergarten, and it is funded separately from basic education. That enrollment is now separate from our kindergarten enrollment. Prior to this school year, it was part of kindergarten. We are going to increase the classroom by 1. So we're, instead of having 3 TKs, we're going to have 4 TK classrooms. Local effort assistance, I added this year because this is going to play a huge factor into what we're going to be talking about, and that is what the state provides us in matching funds because we pass our levy. Fund balance, that's the district reserves, that is our savings account. That is what we have after all the revenues expenditures from year to year and how it's grown or decreased throughout the years. Financial management is overseen by the school board, the superintendent, and his executive staff. We adhere to the state laws and the guidelines. We also get an annual audit that goes over all our financial statements and make sure that we're following guidelines. I want to report again that we had no findings this year, so for the 22-23 school year. We use a fund-based system, and we are considered a first-class district because we have more than 1,000 students.
Amy, if I could step back to Director Perneda's question just a minute. The question that you asked about what kind of feedback we might get from the ESD, I think if you think about your own personal finances and you have your family's financial plan, and then maybe once a year you meet with a financial advisor, and then at the end of the year you pay your taxes. For us, we develop our family budget as a district, and you're part of that, helping us develop that. Our sort of financial advisor would be the ESD. Here are the trends, here's what other people are doing, here's what other districts are doing. And then what Amy just shared, the auditor is sort of the tax man. Did you follow all the laws? Did you do it right? So the kind of feedback we would get from the ESD wouldn't be spend your money in this area. It would be, here are things we're seeing in other districts. Here's what we're hearing about legislation. Here's some new funding that might be coming. Here's some that's going away. So if that helps you understand a little bit about how they work in the system.
Okay, the district has 5 funds that we have. We have the general fund, and that's our biggest fund. That's where most of our revenues go into. From that fund, we have to pay all our salaries and all our materials, supplies, and operating costs. We have the capital projects funds, and those are for major purchases or capital improvements to our properties. We have our debt service fund, and that is used to pay our bond, the interest payments, the interest and the payments. Our balance as of December was $9,590,000, and that should be paid off with our last payment in December of 2027. So we're getting close. Our ASB fund, that's for the students, and they use that money for the cultural, athletic, recreational, and social activities. We also have the vehicle fund, and that is to purchase that's to purchase buses and for major repairs. In previous years, I guess I should say, the general fund can support the other funds, but the other funds cannot support the general fund. In previous years, we have made transfers out of the general fund for the transportation, the capital projects. We are not going to do that in the 24-25 school year. The expenditures that I will be requesting you to approve will be the general fund expenditures projected to be $87,872,692. The capital projects, $1,041,000. Our debt service fund, $3 million. ASB, $639,296, and the transportation vehicle fund, $450,000. And we're going to go into more details on that. What are some budget initiatives? The ESSER funding is going away. We have a plan in place to spend all of it in this school year, in the 23-24 school year. Because our expenditures are getting to be more than what we're getting allocated, the carryover from our categorical grants will be very minimal, our carryover into the next school year. So in the past, for example, if we would get $1 million from Title I, right off the bat, we would say we're going to carry over 15% to the next school year. That amount's gotten less and less every year, just because our salaries are getting more and more. We're beginning the phase of right sizing, or we're going to continue. We're going to increase, like I said, the TK program by 1 classroom. Legislation did increase the percentage for the special education funding, but because of where our numbers are, we're not really getting too much for additional for SPED. Categorical funding, state and federal, are not keeping up with the IPD increases. So. There's a slide in here about what we're expecting in categorical funding, and then you're going to see where it's not keeping up, and I'll get into that.
Quick question. ESSER funding is stopping for all school districts in Washington, correct?
Correct. We did have, we would have been able to spend it also in September, but we decided to just cut it off at the end of August and not go into the next school year for a month.
I think an example in the real world for some of the board members, Director Prowse, if I use Director Baginski as an example for IPD and state and federal grants, if the state of Washington and the dairy farmers said, we're going to give you an extra 2% on all your milk next year, and you cheer about that, but your cost for labor went up 5%, you're 3% in the hole. You still dug a little bit more of a hole, and that's exactly what's happening with these things. As our salaries have increased, the allotment from the federal or state government hasn't matched that. So the gap that already existed continues to get wider.
Okay. So some legislative impacts. We've already discussed IPD being 3.7, and then the MSOC decreasing to 1.9. Special education, they increased the student enrollment cap from 15 to 16%. But as of, I think, our July apportionment, our SPED students were 11.4 5-6% of our FTEs. ESSER, like I said, no more funding. SEB is going up 7% to 1,178. And the reason that that's important is our subs, once they work 630 hours, we have to pay insurance for them. That's an unfunded mandate. For this, just for information, for the 23-24 school year, we're paying about $90,000 in SEB for our subs. And that's gone up every school year. I think last year I think it was like 40,000. So that's a trend that's been going up.
That's every year? Does it go back to zero every year? Or is it once they accumulated 620 hours in a year? Or in their
I think once, so if they're a sub that has continuously worked at least 630 hours for the past 2 years, we pay SEB from the get-go. If they're a new sub, we wait until they get to the 630 hours and then we pay. So it's not gonna be like the full year, but let's say by December, they've already worked 630 hours and then we would pay January moving forward, all the way through the end of August.
Is that health insurance?
Yes,
Okay.
that's medical, dental, and vision
And once they get it, they have it for,
until the end of the school year.
oh, okay.
So if they qualify in February, that's when they get their 630 hours. They'll get the insurance March, April, May, June, July, and August. So it still it adds up.
Yeah, right. But then once the new school year starts, they're back to no health care.
Correct, for the ones that have not continuously met the 630 hours.
Okay.
We do have several for that every year.
They hit it.
So we pay all 12 months of insurance for them.
Is this from a lack of subs, like a lot of places, or?
I would, yeah.
I think it was driven legislatively by some of the push, particularly in a state like Washington, to guarantee health care for all individuals in our state. So it was part of that. And also as a way for some school districts to attract substitute teachers because it was difficult to find them. What you get into is a bit of a game in larger districts of, if you have a really large system where you have 100 subs that meet this standard, it adds up pretty quick. In a place like Othello, it would be, if these are our 4 best substitutes, we want to put the best people in front of our kids every day. And if they're local people that we know, then you say, I guess we'll absorb that cost. I think what Amy's illustrating here really well is there's a lot of costs here to absorb that are unfunded by the state. And that's because that's actually a pretty small one. The IPD one is a big one. The special education funding, they can pat themselves on the back that additional funding went, but in our particular instance, we didn't meet that threshold. We're not getting any additional funding. It's all these little things that add up and pile up to create a deficit.
Yeah, I don't have the exact numbers, but like in 23-24, our apportionment for sub cost are just for certificated is 130,000, and our actual costs are probably 1.5 million. So that's part of the expense for our subs. We also get funded 3 days for the certificated to have professional development. That there is no change on that. And then this is in 24-25 will be the last year of the 3-year where they were increasing the amounts of prototypical funding for the physical, social, and emotional support staff. And I just wanted to state that in 23-24 we did exceed the amount that the state gave us. So I don't have the exact numbers on, but I can provide that if you want. Okay.
A connection for the board there in the conversation with our legislative reps. This is exactly what we talked about from the prototypical funding model. When they sent out this money, teacher groups and labor unions knew they were working from the assumption that that money was for that kind of work. And so you could target where you would send that money. When we talked about extending the prototypical model, it would be exactly that. Send some additional funding, but target in where you want us to use it so that it provides more direction and clarity for folks, not just attached to salary enhancements or other things that are there's already a gap.
I'll provide that on the 22nd for you. Okay. So next, we're gonna talk about enrollment, and the reason that enrollment is important is because that's what drives our funding. The more students we have, the more it provides, more apportionment we receive. If our numbers go down, the less funding that we receive. So enrollment, they put all the enrollment numbers by grade level, and then that spits out our prototypical funding per grade level for teachers and all other areas. So with that, they give us our salaries and benefits, and then that gives us also the amount that they give us for MSOCs. How we projected our enrollment is that we rolled up the first graders up to second to third. And we kept going, except for kinder this year. What we did is we took data from the live births for the 2019 school year, which will be our kindergartners this year, and then we did a percentage. What I looked at was historically, we get about 80, I think I have the number in here somewhere, 89% of the births that happen in Adams County end up as kindergartners in our district. Okay. We are reducing 45 FTEs from our 11th graders, our incoming 11th graders, due to a higher increase in Running Start programs. Wanted to state here that during this current school year, there was an increase of homeschool applications and an increase for students going to online school at other districts. Therefore, what we are trying to do as a district, and I know Amy Paris did a presentation on that, we're trying to do our own online school. So we have budgeted for that as well. As stated before, TK will increase by 1. Our enrollment this year is going to be 4,290 students, K-12. That is 35 less students than this year's actuals, than the 23-24 actuals. And I just made a note here that this is going back to what our enrollment was in 17-18 school year.
Quick question, could you talk just a little bit about how the Running Start students affect this? So when students go to Running Start, we lose all the funding or just part of the funding, or how does that?
They're counted, I think, like we get like 7% for them. So once we get into the enrollment history, you'll see where the drop-off is, where the 10th grade versus the 11th graders are averaging about a 50 FTE drop.
So ideally, if we were able to capture more students with our AA on campus, we would be able to maybe keep those numbers. I mean, keep the kids from going to CBC or Big Bend if we were able to. I mean, we're close, right? We're right there.
My understanding is they would still be enrolled as Running Start students. It might change the percentage based on what we offer locally. But really, the program we're trying to get at with you, what you're describing is, will Big Bend accept some of our credits that we offer as transfer into their program? So Big Bend is going to want to, as an example, they're going to want to hold on to as many FT as they can, and so do we. So it would really be a conversation with them about how much we keep, how much they keep.
Okay.
Yep.
The one that would drive this would probably be the online schooling, and trying to capture those kids would help us. Is that what I'm understanding?
Yes, and in this model, it would really be sort of a wash, because what Amy has indicated here is we're going to try and bring 20 to 40 to 60 families back, but that means we have to hire another teacher. So those kids are going to pay for that teacher. Really, this was an effort from a teaching and learning perspective, is to do a better job with our kids and families in our community who need an online experience, and it pays for itself. So it's sort of cost neutral. If we didn't hire another teacher and adjusted maybe our model, then it could be additional funding in the bank, but we're not prepared to do that right now.
Okay, so the next slide is enrollment. I wanted to show you what we budgeted last year for the 23-24 school year, and what we actually received, what we actually had. So if you notice that last year we budgeted 4,415 students, K-12, and we ended up with an average of 4,325. These numbers do not include Running Start, Open Doors, TK, Alternative Learning, preschool. And to put this into perspective, 90 students is about $867,000 that we did not receive that we had budgeted for.
So this negative 76 on 11th is by far the biggest. Is that the Running Start drop-off
Yes.
you were talking about? Okay.
Yes. So in the past, when I've been doing enrollment for the past 3 years, I've never made an adjustment for the Running Start, and it's always been absorbed somewhere else until I started looking at the history and thinking, okay, what is happening here? And then I was doing enrollment this year, so I could tell that there was an increase in homeschooling and, online and stuff like that. So it was a time to step back and really take a harder look at our enrollment. And that's why I did the analysis for the live births and the Running Start.
Not only that, but I also noticed that SkillSource runs the school program here too.
Correct.
And we put out quite a bit for those
Yes, I think
students
that went up to like 30-some students this year. It's good for our students,
Yes.
but. So where are we going for the 24-25 school year? So what I'm projecting, like I said, our elementaries are gonna go down by about 35. Our middle school is gonna go down by 32, and then our high school is gonna go up by 32. So that'll be a net decrease of enrollment of 35 students.
And you feel comfortable with those numbers?
Yes, you don't wanna project too high or too low. So, but I don't have a
Isn't-
crystal ball, so
Isn't it better to project lower?
Yeah.
I mean, is this projection based on maybe a lower? end?
yes, I projected it a little bit
Lower,
lower,
okay.
yes.
Is there, you have like an index you go by every year for projection, like 3% or 2%? Or
No, usually we just roll down like I said, the first graders on down. And this year, I took a really hard look at the kinder enrollment and using the live births, and then the Running Start. So I feel better about this number than I did the previous one.
You had on the 23-24 enrollment, we lost some kids there in 7 and 8. And here I'm just trying to go back and look at last year's to this year's and just see how come some of them are such a difference.
Mhm. Make sure you're looking at the 23-24 final average, not the budget.
Yeah, no, I'm looking at the difference.
Yeah, yeah.
I'm looking at the difference column and just figuring.
So the drop in kinder enrollment, I mean, it's gonna affect years to come because it just keeps trickling down, right?
No, I was looking more like at the 7th and 8th of why we lost those 15 kids in the in last year's deal.
Mm-hmm.
Like,
I know there was an increase, like I said, so the previous year, we had like 25 homeschool applications, and this past year, we had like 50, and a lot of them was that grade level.
that grade level, okay,
Yeah.
that makes sense.
Okay, so this is a new slide, the other enrollment. And I wanted to add it this year because when you go onto the OSPI and if someone is looking at our report card, it states a larger number of enrolled students. And there has been questions in the past of why that's so high. And I just wanted to say that that includes this other enrollment. So we have the preschool, the TK, the Running Start, Open Doors, and then the online schools.
It's a lot of kids that are.
Yeah,
counted.
and these students are not part of the prototypical funding formula. They don't create dollars for that.
I just,
Like teaching positions, administration positions.
but they do cost us
Yes, we-
travel, transportation,
Yes.
and everything else.
So we do get funding for Running Start, TK, Open Doors, and ALE, but they just don't produce staffing units. One of the things that I wanted to say about the TK, that although we are increasing it, it should break even. However, that depends on the salaries of the teachers and the paras. Wherever they fall, it could either be that there's money left over at the end of the school year, or that we might have to put money in there from our levy LEA money. It's just going to depend. But if there is money left over at the end of the school year, we do have to restrict that in our fund balance because it can only be used for TK.
With that being said, would that number be big?
No, so when I did the TK to see whether or not we would increase it by a classroom, I used a median teacher pay, and it looked like we would be good, but I think the teacher that was
Higher?
hired was a little bit higher than, was on the higher,
And
so we might have to support it by about 30 or 40,000. Okay, so now we go into enrollment history, all the way back to 09010. I just wanted to, we always include this so that you have some idea of how our enrollment has been throughout the years. If you notice that in school year 22-23 and 21-22, TK was part of our kinder enrollments. So if you ever look at previous information on OSPI, that kinder number might be a little higher, but that's because it's the TK students. And I added pictures this year in case you guys wanted to see the graphs of how the enrollment did. So the next slide is just information. It's the same numbers, but in a visual. So the next slide, the state funding per student. This is an OSPI slide that I wanted to make sure you guys had this in front of you. Back in the 18-19 school year, the state was allocating about $12,525 per student. In the 23-24, they're projecting about $11,500. Okay, so even though we're fully funded education, it's going down, right? Good question.
I get, where'd they take the $1,000? They just said.
Yeah, so in our
$280 or
case,
what?
so I did the calculations off here on the side. So if we were looking at 937 for 4290, for 4,290 students, that's $4 million.
I'm just wondering, like, are we not supposed to feed them, skip the milk?
Where do we
Well,
cut?
No, where-
everything is more expensive,
Well, I
and we're
get it,
getting
but,
less per
but-
student.
well, that's where the problem is. How come we were getting 12,525,
Yeah.
but yet here we are, basically 5 years down the road, and you've taken 1,000 off each kid. I
And-
guess my question is to the state, not to,
Yeah, yeah.
or Pete, where do we ask, or
Yeah, and the
where'd
other
that
thing,
go?
the other thing too is that 18-19 school year is the first year that after the McCleary decision where we were gonna be fully
Oh.
funded. And yet it's gone down.
A phone call to
So.
Olympia, maybe?
Make some
They
noise.
stopped answering when I called.
Oh, okay.
They blocked me.
Just for the interest of time, Amy, it's you have about 25 minutes left.
Okay, I better hurry.
And I apologize, we just have a lot of questions, and at least for me, being my first time on there, I apologize. I just,
No, that's fine.
the more I know, the easier it is for me to understand it, and if somebody explains, so.
The next slide is just letting you guys know the birth rates from Adams County and how they're decreasing. There's some information on there for you as well.
TV.
The next slide is the fund balance on all our funds. So the big one is for for the 23 is the general fund. We're going to begin the school year, the 24-25, with a fund balance of about 15 million. Our revenues are going to be about 82.2. Our expenditures about 87.8. So we're going to have a decrease to our fund balance of $5.5 million.
And that's still not counting little things like the overpay of TK or teacher salary. Or
That,
there's
that
there's-
includes all the salaries that we have calculated as of right now, with all the increases, the increase to SEB, everything's in there. We have decreased some department budgets by a little bit in the MSOX areas. We're trying to cut back, but hopefully our students come back, and we get higher enrollment. And I'll kind of explain too, here in the next slide or two, of what's causing that fund balance decrease.
And just out of curiosity, Amy, so there will be an adjustment to this once we physically know what students we have, who's all enrolled. There'll be a different one that
every-
comes out that's all
yes.
adjusted to, that'll give us a little, I guess, better insight. Is that correct?
So we get our apportionment September through December is based on my budget numbers, and then in January it'll be the big month where they're gonna make some changes or adjustments based on the actual enrollment. I do monthly cash flow every month, and I can see the trends there, and hoping not to go more than that.
So then come January, you'll be able to tell us, hey, these is what what kids we actually had. And okay.
Yep. And then the next slide is just kind of comparing this budget to the 24-25 budget to last year's budget, and where the big changes are in red. So you will see that our revenues projecting to be down 5.5 million, and that kind of correlates with the fund balance decrease. The decrease in the revenues is primarily from the ESSER funding. We're not going to have that. Our LEA amount is going down, then, and then our decreased enrollment affecting our revenues. Okay, a little bit more detail on the general fund.
I think that's an important point there. If we just go back one slide, thinking to the visual that Amy provided about the cans. We knew this was coming. Some districts experienced it last year or the year before because they were more aggressive with hiring staff, or they weren't as fiscally sound in 22, 23, and 23, 24. We knew there was going to be a decrease in revenues. And so some of the right sizing that occurred this last school year, we also knew that more of that is coming. So, you know, initially you could be like, 5 million less coming in. Why is that? It's totally tied to that revenue piece, and we're in a position, at least for a year, to sustain that and then decide what our district looks like moving forward.
So we don't need to figure out how we're gonna find $5 million just yet.
No, this would be like you having
This is
a savings account on the farm, and you had a real rough year with milk prices, and you said, well, we go to the rainy day fund. And how do we set up so the next 2 years we're not going back to it?
Okay.
But we just don't, we don't have the ability, like you would in private industry, to go find more money. We need more kids or fewer staff. That's the only way to do it in public work.
Gotcha.
And right now, what we've done over the last decade is we've been able to put a little bit in the rainy day fund,
Okay.
and now's the moment where it's raining.
Yep.
And like you were saying about other schools, you're saying that either they didn't put as much in the rainy day fund or they had to go to it earlier.
Correct.
So they're hitting this part.
Exactly.
Earlier. Okay.
Or they hired additional staff with those ESSER funds, and just trying to get through a couple really difficult years and unusual times, and they ran into this situation.
So then a closer look at the revenue real quick. I just wanted to point out that in the next two slides, actually, it's talking more about the LEA, and that's a levy equalization money that we get from the state. It's projecting to be 2.2 million, almost 2.3 million less than what we had projected it to be last year for the 24-25 school year.
Pete, was that the one that you told me because we did that $1.50 and
Exactly, that's
That's
tied to the design of the levy and local property values.
So the next slide, the next one, goes into a little bit more detail about, so we have these tools from OSPI that it provides information to us of how we budget our LEA money. So last year, the budget tables indicated that we were gonna get 5.9 million in the 24-25 school year in LEA funding. The new table with the updated property values, we're only gonna get 3.6 million. That's a difference of almost 2.3 million. They're projecting our property values in the 2025 to be 2.9 million. So we'll see where we end up at. Last year, when they said our property values, I said million, but it's billion, sorry, thanks Angie. 2 billion, it actually was, if you look at the next slide, our property values in the 2024 was 2.3 million. So they came in under. I'm hoping that isn't the case again. So that slide, the assessed value, was provided by Piper Sandler. They're the ones who help us when we are going out for a levy, and he gave us the updated property values. And then the next slide is just a visual of where we get our revenues from. And then the next slide is just more details of what the revenues are, what they're called, the revenue source, and where the money's from. And then we'll go into staff changes. Those are the new hires and the eliminated positions. And then in the employee FTE, you can see where, how many certificated staff. Most of the certificated staff also includes the admin and then the classified staff. So you'll see that totals are for this school year, what the totals were for last year's budget, and then the difference. So even though we're reducing a net 6.249 FTEs, our salary increased by $3.1 million. So one of the things that we have to keep in mind is that we do get 3.7% in IPD from the state, but those are unfunded positions. And also most pay scales include a step increase for every year. That is also unfunded. So like
longevity pay.
the longevity. So every year it goes up, that's unfunded. So not only did they get the 3.7, they also got, let's say, another 1% for the state, for the step increase.
And what are, so, and the other ones that aren't funded are basically non-union positions, is that correct?
Correct.
No, they would be, certificated staff would be union, they would still be teacher union positions, but it might not be a position that the state or the federal government fully supports.
From the prototypical funding formula.
What would be an example?
An example would be the art teachers. So we had art teachers, we were funding them locally. Hey, we don't know that we can sustain that. We need to right size a little bit. That position would have gone away. And so there are a number of those in schools. When we talk about what does it need, what do you need to run a school district, what we really need and what the state funds, there's a difference, there's a gap. And so all of our responsibility is for those other people.
Gotcha.
And then the next visual is just kind of going back to the 14-15 school year of what where our enrollment was versus our FTEs of employees. So you'll see that in the 19-20 school years probably, and then in 2021, that's where we want to be. You know, as our enrollment's going down, our FTEs should be going down as well. The next slide is just a categorical revenues, a closer look. So this is the slide where I said these are the grants that we receive, what we got in 23-24, what we're projecting to get in 24-25, and you can see where, for example, Title I is gonna go down 174,000. So with that being said, it's not keeping up with the IPD increases that we give our staff.
Why is Title I going down so significantly? We don't know?
No.
Okay.
So those are allotments from the federal government, and we know whatever the initiative is in Washington D.C. and whatever they get the 50 states to agree to, that's how the money is, sent out each year. And again, those must be changes in that programming.
But is that money allotted per child? So if we have decreased enrollment, then we have decreased Title I?
Yeah, it's
I mean, that makes
definitely
sense.
attached to individual students.
Okay.
Okay, and then we have expenditures by programs. And that just, so our expenditures are always broken down by either program, by activity, and by object, and then location. So here you can see the programs. We have the regular instruction, special education, how much in CTE, and then other supports. And then the next page is just a graph showing the same numbers. And then we'll go by object. So that's where we go into how much of it goes to the certificated teaching salaries, admin salaries, the benefits, et cetera. How much we spend in MSOCs, which is the bottom part of it. One of the things that I wanted to bring up here is that we always consider that we're in a good place when 80% of our salaries and benefits is 80% of our expenditures. But this year, we're going to take a little look into it because our revenues are going down, and trying to look at historical of should it also be 80% of our revenues. That's something that we're looking at. Historically, our salaries have been about 80% of our expenditures, and then they have been also 80% of our revenues. And then we have our object summary, our historical, so you can see how much we spent in the past and how much we're projected to spend. And then we have it by percentages so that you can see where the decreases and increases are. And then we have the expenditures by activity. And then the next page, the expenditures by program, is just saying where we're going to increase or decrease our expenditures. And the big one, as you can see there, is just the ESSER funding. And then our categorical spending going down as well. And then that's more of a breakdown of our expenses. And then the change to fund balance. Historically, what has happened, and then what we project it to happen. So fund balance should be seen as something that we need to have to weather a storm, right? And this coming year, it was what we call the perfect storm. We went to a business managers conference, and there was a great discussion about how it's all this perfect storm. We have the enrollment, we have the LEA, we have the ESSER money going away, and if we only had one of those things, we probably would be okay, but when they all came together, it's just creating chaos all over. So,
Okay, so just to clarify, the fund balance is what the board has required to keep in reserves, correct?
so the board has required to keep 10% of our expenditures, which is, let's say, roughly 8 million this school year. If we spend 80 million in the 23-24, we'll reserve 8 million of it.
That requirement was defined by this school board. It's not a state or federal requirement.
Right. So with what's going on, we're going to go from a fund balance,
From 15 to about 10. Those are the rough numbers.
okay.
So what that means is, although we are not, that is a board requirement, the 10%, there are things that we have to restrict that is required by OSPI that we have to restrict. Like all our carryover has to be restricted. The professional development money that we don't spend has to be restricted. Our TK money that we don't spend, if we don't spend it all, it has to be.
So,
There's also the food service money that we don't, I don't know what's the word? The food service they give us at the end of the year, that they have $80,000 left in food from this current school year. The inventories, there we go, that's the word I was looking for.
so out of the fund balance, or out of that 15 million that's in there right now, how much of that money is restricted already?
The 10% and about another 2 million, I think, is restricted right now. In the past, we have restricted money as, to help with technology, curriculum, costs due to the increase in payroll, but we will not be able to have any of those monies set aside anymore.
And are we gonna have to adjust a policy or something, because I know it's been 10% since before I was on the board. Okay? And is this our last year of needing to borrow from that fund balance?
It depends on the adjustments in staffing and adjustments in revenue over the next year. This is really a year to look. We've initiated conversations with our labor management groups last year about what was coming. We started those again just this last week. So we feel like we have a partnership feeling right now with them about what's going to have to happen. So it will be a matter of how much do you cut 1 year as opposed to over 2 years. It's sort of that kind of long-range planning. And a lot of that will be driven by what the board says. This is what good accounting practices say. This is what we need in the bank. Some of it, your question about Title I, will tie to national and local politics. So the cuts in Title I are being driven by, in a sort of big picture view, anger across the country about poor outcomes for kids after a significant investment of COVID money. We gave you all this money, and only 30% of our kids read at standard. We're not going to give you any more money. That's really what's driving it on one side of the aisle, and then the other side of the aisle saying, we need more money, we need more money. So national elections will affect what happens here. State elections will affect that. All of those will tie into, we have a pretty good idea of what this year will look like. Next year really depends on the next several months. Which again, that idea of kicking the can down the road, you don't want to kick it so far or squash it and impact the next 4 or 5 years if you don't have to.
So the next slide is just a visual of what's, the perfect storm, but we're standing on a rock, and the rock is our fund balance, right? We're standing on there right now. And the next slide shows what could happen, what's happening in other districts. So they're in financial distress, and then what happens when you're in financial distress and you don't make the adjustments, you go into binding conditions and you just all start to pile up. And I have some articles there if you guys wanted to look up things that are going around. I have a note here that I kind of wanted to bring up. I know we're running out of time, but in 22, so I don't know if you guys remember, OSPI does the financial indicators of how the school districts are. Last year, there was 19 school districts that were on there as financial warning. Only 5 of those, there are 5 districts now that are struggling that weren't even showing distress last year. So we have to be very super careful what we do next. Because even though we're not showing that we're in financial distress and we won't show it probably in the 23-24 school year, but we probably going to show that we're in financial distress in the 24-25 school year.
When you say next year, you mean this one coming, right?
We'll be fine in the 23-24 school year.
Or 24, 25, you mean? I'm confused. She means 24, 25, right?
Yes, 24, 25, when we're
Okay.
gonna have a decrease, we're gonna have a decrease in our fund balance. We're gonna have a decrease in our revenues compared to our expenditures. There's several indicators that they look like. So I know that if that becomes reality, we're gonna show that we're in financial warning. So a closer look at fund balance, just kind of where we've been in the past. Those are the funds that we get restricted. Just kind of letting you know that in the past, we have been able to restrict money for items and contingencies, and we will not have that this coming year. We will not have enough fund balance for technology or curriculum to set aside money for those types of big things. The ESSER payroll impact, I wanted to bring this to your attention again because the bottom line shows that we paid $7.9 million of our, in payroll that should have been or would have been paid out of basic ed. So our fund balance could have potentially been $7.9 million less if we hadn't pivoted and paid some of our salaries out of ESSER. So that's where
That's a very important point. So what Amy just said is some of those districts that she described that have the boats crashing against one another, they hired additional boats with some of that ESSER money and ended up where they did. We didn't do a lot of that, but we used some of the funding to delay, to kick the can down the road, and now we're here. Now it's time to gradually reduce to get to what's something that's sustainable.
So basically, if we don't have an enrollment, we're having a fire sale, is that what I'm understanding?
I don't know that fire sales, that's what it feels like when you,
I
when
mean,
you,
I mean, I'm just, after,
yeah.
no
Yeah.
offense, she's squirming over there. I
Yeah.
love it, Amy, but she's telling me, and then, so at this point, I mean,
I think it's when you get comfortable in a situation, whether it's your personal finance or your business finance, and certainly for us, you get used to a pattern of, we get this much a year, this much goes in savings, this much goes in retirement, this much we spend. You get in this pattern, in this rhythm, and then all of a sudden, you have a bad crop of onions, your renters don't pay, something happens, and it's not there anymore, and so it can make you sit back a little bit. And thank goodness you have some in the bank, right, in reserve. What will be a fire sale is if you don't pay attention to that reserve and how to preserve it. You can't do that a couple years in a row, then you get in trouble.
So the fund balance has been our security blanket, right? We've been, okay, we can do that, we can manage that, we have fund balance, we'll take care of it. But then if we continuously, which it shows in our 4-year where our expenditures are gonna be more than our revenues, our fund balance goes away. And once that goes away, how do you come back from that? So,
We can't drain our savings account.
Yeah.
And it's been going down year after year after year. We have to stop that.
and for me, sitting back, it being my first year and going over these numbers, it just feels like it's been, we got some there, we got some there, we got some there. And then finally now, it's gotten to the point where, because we took this big hit, we're not gonna have that. So at some point, we need to fix or correct it.
It'll leave us with 9.5 million in our fund balance, right?
correct.
Which is still roughly 10% of our, so we're still like, I don't wanna use the term in compliance, but we're still in our policy requirement. Oh, is it 15%, not 10?
No, it's been 10%, so your view is exactly right, which is why we see this year as so critical to not only communicate. I mean, we do this every year.
Yeah,
It's just the numbers are in red now, right?
Yeah.
So it's how are we going to react and respond to that moving forward? So your view on it, Lindsay, is we're going to be okay this year, and then we really have to plan and work with our labor partners to say, what does that mean next year? So it's just sort of this 2 or 3 year process. It's not we're going to do it right now. What I think surprises boards and surprises communities, and when you say we're doing a 10% reduction this year, right? And you tell them that without some planning. We have some time to plan for it and to prepare for it.
Just to go off of Lindsay, we're okay, but because we had the SR money, because otherwise you said it would have been an
Correct.
additional
Correct.
But that conversation, the conversation we're having today, we would have had 2 years ago.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So just another visual, the Esther Cliff, this was on there last year, and it's just something that was provided by OSPI saying, we knew this was coming, the 24, 25, they called it the year of the bloodletting. No more, but I think, so we knew it was coming, we had warning, okay? It's not- And then the next statement is just an MSOC requirement, we have to have this on our thing, on our presentation, that we're gonna get $6.6 million for the MSOCs, and we're going to spend about 11.8. One of the analysis, we did a SWOT analysis this year of our budget. So the strengths of our budget is that we're being transparent and we continue to collaborate. We're trying to realign our resources, and we're being proactive right now in financial planning for the future. Our weaknesses is the declining student enrollment, the IPD factors, not our revenues are not increasing by as much as our IPD is going. Sorry, I'm getting in a hurry. Sorry. We have declining federal grant allocations, and then our reduction in our fund balance, and then our property values. We have no control over what our property values do. The opportunities is that we can align our spending with declining enrollment. We could possibly start talking about a future capital levy. We could seek out efficiencies and cost reductions, and then we're gonna have really big oversight on all of our spending. There might be a lot of no's this year. Threats is that we still have the fluctuating enrollment, that we're depending this coming year on our fund balance, and that we're operating in a deficit where our expenditures are more than our revenues. And then the next few slides is just our, we have to have our 4-year budget. Starting with enrollment, and due to the declining birth rates, you're gonna notice that by the end of the 4-year, we have a decline of 245 students. So, and then in the general fund 4-year forecast, we start off with, again, with the 24-25, but then we're planning it out. If you see in the 25-26, we're planning to reduce our expenditures in that school year. And we're still, like I said, that's one of our goals. Even with the reduction of that in our expenditures, we're still gonna eat up a little bit of our fund balance.
So Director Prowse, on that slide, if you look at the projected ending fund balance, 9.5, 8.1, there's that 6.8 where we dip below the 10%, and then back up in 27, 28, right around that 10% threshold.
Yeah, so the reason we're going up in the 27, that's only if we pass a new levy. So that was the increase into also our revenues that year. So we have some more information on our 4-year forecast. And then the visual of what our revenues and expenditures are doing versus our student count. And like I said, in the 27-28 school year, the reason that the bars are higher is because of we're hoping to pass a new levy. A lot depends on that. And then the next graph is our revenues and expenses versus our fund balance and what it's gonna do. And then we also have our 4-year forecast on our capital projects, debt service, ASB, and the transportation vehicle fund. The only thing here that I probably want to point out is in our capital projects, we do have some big ticket items this coming year. We're gonna finish off the counseling center at McFarland, a little bit for the Lutacaga portables, the high school and Scootney portables, and then we might move forward with fixing the Lutacaga roof. There's not gonna be no room after this school year if something major happens. So that's something else to keep in mind. If the general fund can support capital projects, but if we're in a situation where we can't, we just have to be very aware of that. And then our debt service, just like I said, it's basically the same from year to year, expenditures and our revenues, and it matures in December of '27. ASB, it looks like our ending fund balance goes down a little bit each year as well, but not much. And then the transportation vehicle fund, in the 23-24 school year budget, I was hoping to increase the general fund to transfer 150,000 every year to help support, but I put a hold on that. So, but it looks like we still continue to purchase 2 buses. But if anything major happens, like a major bus breakdown, we'll have to figure out what we're gonna do then.
We're still purchasing the 2 buses that we had.
Yeah, we should still be able to purchase 2 base buses. Maybe no AC, but,
We have windows.
okay.
We made it through.
Okay, so the next step is on August 22nd. If you guys have any questions, we can answer those questions. If anybody from the public can come and ask questions. And then on the 26th is when we have to pass the resolution for the budget, and then we have to submit it to us, OSPI, by the 31st of August. That's our date. And I thought you'd enjoy some pictures that we are OSD, and we're still moving forward, trying to support our kiddos. So, went over a little bit. Any more questions or comments?
For me,
The-
I'd like, go ahead, Chris, go ahead.
I just, the teacher increase every year, the IPD, or that's the state, or is that the state does that, or the union does it, or?
So on the teacher union contract, it states that we're gonna increase their base contracts by IPD. This 24-25 school year, it will be 3.7. But they also get a step increase that is not part of what we get in revenues.
So that's automatic, every year, there's always a increase.
Yes,
But then
that's an unfunded increase.
yeah, but then the state, like, as Eduardo was saying, that we're losing 1,000 per kid, but the teacher salaries are going up,
Correct,
because it's mandatory, right?
correct.
We got no wiggle room on that.
So if we were to take the average student, the average teacher pay versus what we're getting allocated, there's a difference, I think, of about 17,000. If you times that by 296 teachers, that's like $4.5 million.
I just want to say thank you guys for putting this together, taking the time to explain it to 3 of us that are new. I definitely have questions. It's a lot to take in, but if you guys would be willing to either let me, I won't email, I'll call you guys. That's okay.
I'm always available, well, except for the last week of August.
Thank you.
Good, thank you.
Okay, thank you. Okay, at this time, we'll close that.